Hello and welcome to the Employee Advocacy and Influence podcast. My name is Lewis Gray. I'm a senior marketing manager here at Disseminate. My co-host today is my colleague Elliot Elsley, who is our director of sales engineering. But most notably, for the first time ever, we have three people on the podcast, and that's because we're joined by the brilliantly talented Maike Jansen. So, Maike, firstly, how are you? And would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and your role at Dentsu?
Oh, that was one of the greatest introductions I ever had, I guess. Thanks so much, Lewis. I'm Maike Jansen. I'm the employee advocacy lead at Dentsu Benelux. It's a modern media agency, or at least the department where I'm working. And within our company, within our agency, I'm responsible for employee advocacy, building our client portfolio, working on partnerships, but also working with clients on a more operational and a more strategical level to work on their employee advocacy programs.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Yeah, and to give everybody a bit of context, we spoke recently about getting some guests on the podcast, and without a doubt, Micah's name was at the top of the list. And it seems ever since you've confirmed for an episode and we've spoken about it within the business, everybody seems to have spoken to you at some point. And it's just like, oh, Micah, I love Micah. That's great. I can't wait to hear it. So a lot of excitement internally. So we're excited to get into this one. But Elliot, sorry, I didn't give you a chance to introduce yourself, so
Oh,
over to you.
you gave me a pretty fair introduction. So yeah, I'm Elliot. I've been with Disseminate for 6 years and hopefully quite well experienced in advocacy off the back of those 6 years, and currently in a sales engineering role, and previously ran a lot of the advocacy programs across Disseminate.
Awesome. Yeah, so I think it will be a good coming together. I can see a lot of stories coming out of this episode. I feel it might quickly turn into a series, but we'll see how we go. But just for everybody's, or to give everybody a bit of context on the episode, sorry, we wanted to discuss how employee advocacy programs can help organizations maintain brand consistency, brand safety, and brand suitability across social media. So we'll cover a few of the strategies for managing employee content. We'll address concerns related to intellectual property and security. And then hopefully Elliot and Micah will provide some real world examples from some of the most successful programs they've worked on. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Okay, so we wanted to start today's episode with something a little bit different, and I guess depending on how it goes, we'll continue to include this in episodes moving forward. So I'm putting Micah on the spot here and being the first person to test out this new segment. But as almost like an icebreaker, we wanted to ask Micah a few questions about employee advocacy and almost do like a quick fire round. So Michael, I'm going to put you on the spot here, as I say, and just start with I guess the most popular one within the world of employee advocacy right now, it seems, which is, do you prefer using an employee advocacy tool, or do you think manual employee advocacy is the way forward?
Like an employee advocacy tool for sure. Yeah.
Glad to hear.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I'm talking to you guys, so.
yeah, I can't disagree. I think it would have been a sticky position, or I would have been in a sticky position had you said otherwise. And then automated sharing or manual sharing.
Manual sharing, because I think authenticity is key.
And then link in post or link in the comments.
Well, if the goal is to drive traffic, then just put the link in the post.
Interesting. And then this is the one that I really wanted to pick your brain on. I worry we could go on a bit of a tangent with this one, but in your mind, what is a better measurement of employee advocacy success? So would you refer to website analytics, so for example, Google Analytics, or do you point more towards social media data?
That's a hard one. It really depends on the objectives, I guess, of your employee advocacy program. But I have to pick. So in the end, I would say website analytics. I'm a bit in doubt.
To be honest, I mean, it's an FAQ for a reason. Everybody seems to have their opinion on it. I think there's value in both for sure. I think the yeah, my North Star at the moment is definitely website traffic and website analytics, but that can definitely change depending on what we're looking at. And then lastly, if you could choose one thing, what would you say is the key to employee advocacy success?
I think to have clear objectives from the beginning, which are clear to everyone involved in the program.
Love that. Yeah, they say failing to plan is planning to fail. So I think
Yeah.
setting up and having objectives from the start,
Yeah.
completely aligned with you there. So
Cool.
moving on to the first segment of this episode, the first thing that we wanted to tackle today is this idea of managing brand consistency with employee advocacy. So the reason we wanted to cover this is there's definitely concerns that people and organizations will have when launching a program that the content that employees share will be off brand, whether that be in terms of, the assets that they use, or the text that they provide just isn't on brand for the organization. But I appreciate that everybody has almost a different definition, sorry, of brand consistency. So Mike, obviously being the in-house expert for today, how would you define brand consistency?
Yeah, you can definitely define it in multiple ways, but I think it's all about delivering consistent experiences across all your channels, where you have the touch points with your clients. It's a consistent feeling. Same topics, key topics that you're discussing, brand guidelines being on point. I guess that helps to build trust, build recognition, of course, because if your brand is different everywhere across channels, people won't recognize you. So it's mostly around that, I guess. Anything to add?
No, I mean, to be honest, strip back, that's sort of bang on my definition. I think where it becomes tricky is then just obviously implementing tactics, and when we start to think about strategies to ensure brand consistency and to maintain it within your employee advocacy program. So making sure people don't go rogue and say the wrong thing or maybe go a little bit off brand. So I appreciate, Elliot, I know you'll have a wealth of experience with this, Maike as well. So I'm unsure where to start or who to go to first. So Maike, I'll start with you, and then obviously, Elliot, we can dive into some of your strategies. But in your experience, Maike, with the programs that you've overseen and looked after, what have been the most impactful strategies for maintaining brand consistency with employee advocacy?
Well, it's a bit of an open door, but brand guidelines and social media guidelines just have to be clear to the ones involved in an employee advocacy program. So I guess those guidelines should be available, but also easily accessible. So not too long, not too complex, because that lowers the threshold if you keep it simple. I guess that's one of the key points. Also have a clear contact person in place people can reach out to if they have questions, concerns, maybe even. I think those are one of the most important. Curious to hear what Elliot has to add.
No, I couldn't agree more. On the contact person, that's such a classic one that can happen, particularly at businesses that are like just starting out with these sort of things. I tend to find where they maybe don't have a platform in place. They don't have a set person that you go to ask for an asset or a tool or whatever it might be, and then people just what this leads to, in my experience, is people starting to create their own assets, their own images, their own captions, and that's when, I won't name names on clients, but when certain is typically sales teams in my experience go off and start creating their own imagery in PowerPoint that gets very quickly off brand and is in the wrong color and all of these different things. I tend to find just physically having enough content is such a big element of it, particularly when you start an advocacy program as well. Like when you launch, have a load of content in there that's available to people, have some evergreen content that's going to last forever. So people don't have to go and create their own asset, because people will always opt for the easiest solution. And if the easiest solution is go to the advocacy platform, find a piece of content and share it, that's much better than go and create a kind of dodgy PowerPoint asset that might not fit the brand guidelines. And yeah, to me, just having that ease of access to all of this content, make it easy for people to find it, make it easy for people to get access to whatever they need, that will solve so much brand consistency problem, because people just won't share the wrong thing because it's available to them and it's approved.
Yeah, or maybe to add to that, also have like very clear templates in place. So
Yeah.
if they want to experiment with it, they at least know which boundaries to take into consideration.
Yeah, and there's a lot of content tools that do that as well. And I think, most bigger organizations probably have something like that in place where these kind of templates are pre-built. I guess for the smaller companies, yeah, as you say, just build some templates, have some things available, have a master slide deck that people can use for these things. It makes a big difference across the
Yeah,
board.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
guess it, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry, I don't want to. I don't want to
No,
stop on
no.
this.
I guess a tool or like having at least a place available where all those materials are available, like a one-stop shop where you can find all the contact details of people, FAQs, brand guidelines, templates, whatnot. And the tool, of course, can be that place. That's
Yeah.
super helpful as well.
Yeah, definitely. And it really kind of goes, it's a bit macro when it comes to advocacy, but it's just basically making sure that your employees know that there is an advocacy program and there's a way that this can be done. That's another off tangent, but problem that can occur with these things is when this gets gate kept in a very small area of the business and you have to kind of know about it to be able to even get access. And if you don't know the right people or weren't aware that it's been launched, you have no idea, so you go off and continue down your own road. So
Yeah.
make it known. It's not rocket science from that perspective.
No.
I mean, it makes it feel like less work as well. I imagine, if you know that there's platforms out there like Maike, you touched on having pre-written captions, so providing pre-written social media posts, having a platform that allows basically just gives them a place where they can log in and find social media posts that have been written for them and that are already on brand, just makes that whole process, one, obviously safer for the organization because you know that the employees' posts will be on brand, but then at the same time it's just less time taxing for them. So Elliot, like you said, make sure they know there is a program available and a platform that they can log into and find all of this stuff. But just thinking about real world examples, because the one thing that we always, or that we come across time and time again, is organizations will actually have social media guidelines, they'll have brand guidelines, and a good social media policy too, but they kind of fall at the final hurdle because they don't do a good enough job of getting this in front of employees and making sure they have access to it. So I was curious to know, Maike, in your experience, what's how have brands kind of facilitated this? How have they made sure that employees have access to it?
Yeah, good one. One of our clients has many offices across the Netherlands, and all those different offices, they used to have their own social media pages, which of course was not brand consistent, or of course it was not brand consistent. And for that sake, the company decided to shut down all the local pages and just consolidate it into one big company page. But therefore they also lost touch with like the local communities that those local company pages serve. So they had to go to the employees to say like, hey, you are our touch points, or yeah, you have those networks locally, so we need you. So what we did together with the company, we did a bit of a roadshow across the country, across all the different offices, together with their marketing and communication employees, telling why it's important that the employees started to become more visible online, being the link with the company, and also spreading around the brand guidelines. They actually built a brand portal in which they had a media library, but also social media guidelines, contact persons like us to reach out to. So I think to be physically there on the spot, showing the importance, what's in it for the company, what's in it for you, as well as these are the materials that's going to help you do it. That really helped. And for that company, we're actually also doing full training programs to make sure ambassadors have the right skills to become visible online.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I was going to say even something as simple as, obviously I'm not sure how they've ensured that they kind of have access to these documents, but just something that even we've done in the past is just pinning things in Slack channels. So we've spoken with organizations before who are running employee advocacy programs through Slack, where they just have a dedicated Slack channel, they're just firing content in there. It's definitely not the most efficient way of doing it, but even within that, they just had pinned the key documents that employees will need to the top of that channel. So I'm not too familiar with Microsoft Teams. Elliot, you might be able to speak on this, but I imagine you can pin things to the top of a channel within Teams. But just ensuring that it's there. So whenever you're engaging with the advocacy program, it's right in front of you. You know, it's at the top there, whatever you might need, social media guidelines, brand guidelines, whatever. I think that can be a really nice way of doing it. But yeah, again, Elliot, sorry, same question for you. How have you seen organizations kind of navigate this?
Well, firstly, I'm just happy to hear Maike saying a company's getting rid of all of its separate LinkedIn pages, because that's, I think, the bane of a lot of digital marketers' existence at times, when larger businesses have 19 different. It's always language based, is what we see, and I've kind of got a similar example from that perspective. Which client that we worked with and still work with had, I think, about 10 different LinkedIn pages, all for different languages, which were all serving a very, very small number of followers, but the main brand page had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of followers. So they wanted to shut those pages down, but with the same concern, which is, oh, but what about the kind of native German speakers, the native Spanish speakers? And actually, advocacy is the easiest way to solve for that, because that's what people want to see. Now, they've got language translation on their websites and all sorts of things like that, but they just consolidated everything from an advocacy perspective to serve, I forget the exact number, but it was about 15 different countries. And in doing that, they could just personalize to all the language, localize the entire thing, which meant when people are sharing employee advocacy content, they can do it in their native language, which is great. But also, they just kept that consistency across the entire brand, because now everyone's being directed to the same place. They're going to the same website. They're going to the same LinkedIn pages. We're not just dispersing all of this information. And the typical thing with all of those different pages is they're all run slightly differently as well. So they've all got a slightly different logo and a slightly different headline and everything else that comes with it. So yeah, really similar story from our side of things, just slightly scaled up, I guess, beyond the Netherlands and to lots of different countries. It's a real classic thing that I think a lot of people got into 5-6 years ago, creating all these separate LinkedIn pages. Advocacy just helps with that cohesion. And I think it helps bring teams together as well, from a perspective of, if you have a marketing team in every country that you represent, actually they do work kind of independently. They might be doing their own localized advertising and things like that, but an advocacy program is a nice place to kind of centralize all of them as well. They're all kind of working on the same content, the same ideals, so it's a nice central place for them to work from as well.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think it's great to hear, obviously, what you can do from an organizational perspective when it comes to ensuring that employees stay on brand. But I guess typically when we're thinking about brand consistency, brand safety and suitability, it's usually something, when, you know, brand managers are thinking about this, it's something that the organization will oversee. So thinking about brand suitability, for example, just very stripped back, it's, you know, making sure that where you're advertising is suitable for your brand. So does that, I don't know what it might be, website, for example, does that align with your brand values? And then brand safety, I guess, is just making sure that you're not advertising somewhere that doesn't. So they're kind of intertwined, but ever so slightly different. But I guess it kind of blurs the lines a little bit when you talk about employees sharing, because you have less control over, you know, where employees might be sharing to. Although, you know, I guess the best software out there will allow you to limit shares to certain channels, for example. You might not know what groups those employees are a part of. You always like to think the best of them, but then, you know, you never know. So it's rational, I think, for organizations to raise concerns over this. But if we stay on the topic of safety and suitability for a moment, I guess I'd be curious to know from your side, Maike, what have you heard from organizations that you've worked with? What, generally speaking, are their concerns around safety and security? Is it aligned with kind of what I've said there, or is there more to it from your experience?
No, for sure. Like they are asking, like, how do we monitor what's being said, where it's being said? They have a lot of concerns, considering maybe even intellectual property, crossing lines there, telling information that they should not, maybe even telling information that's not part of the company but of a client, and then, of course, potentially the company could face financial risk, maybe even legal risk, or competitive disadvantages or whatnot. So yeah, I've seen legal compliance risk departments, but also corporate communication departments being a little bit hesitant towards employee advocacy programs. But I think they should not be.
Couldn't agree more on that front. I think you maybe have seen this as well. I tend to find there's obviously the really natural places that will be a bit more hesitant, like pharmaceuticals, financial services, just because they have more I's to dot and more T's to cross, essentially. But I also find there's a lot of brands where there isn't a huge amount of risk involved. There's nothing really that could go wrong that they're posting on social, but they concern themselves with it so much because they don't have the control over it. And I think that's the biggest element. If they're providing content, they're making sure that people are sharing it in the format that they want them to share it in, they're happy. But if they think it's being done outside of that remit, very, very concerned. And I think it just ties into trust in your employees more than anything. If you can trust your employees to just post content, then you're in a really good place. If you don't trust them, which a lot of employers don't, you need controls and ways that you can actually manage that process. And it's just a very simple process to follow of, do we trust our employees to do this themselves? If we don't, we need technology, we need process to implement. If we do trust them, then hey, let's just make it as easy as possible for them to do that.
Yeah, and I suppose it's a case of striking a balance too, right? Like we've spoken about this on the podcast before, we are very much pro giving your employees the reins to post freely on social media, to encourage them to grow their own personal brands authentically without necessarily having to rely too much on, let's say, your marketing team, for example, to provide them with content. But then I suppose that in itself might raise alarm bells with, if, for example, you're within pharmaceuticals or other regulated industries, right? It's like, okay, that's great. We want employees to be growing their personal brands, but it only takes, one employee to say the wrong thing for, I don't know, for things to go quite pear-shaped quite quickly. But Elliot, sorry, you briefly touched on controls and stuff like that. So Maike, I'll hand over to you to kind of hear about your experiences with, again, the organizations that you've worked with. What measures have you had to take to mitigate these risks?
Yeah. I think we've been running employee advocacy programs in more and less regulated industries. I think for the regulated industries, there are a lot of mandatory trainings already in place for privacy, data safety, to prevent data breaches or whatnot. Here at Dentsu, we also have our annual, or maybe even twice a year, we have this training to really comply to all those regulations. So I guess it already could help to put social media as part of that training, mandatory training as well. But we also put it in onboarding trainings, for example. So right from the start, onboard your employees in the way that you want them to. So, for example, one of our clients has a lot of intellectual property. They are very safeguarding their buildings. And so for them, it's very important. I guess a lot of companies have their personal security passes, right, to get into the building. For this company as well, they have like the name on it, the picture on it, but also the name of the company. And although that information on that pass does not get you into the building, the company's doesn't really want those passes to be shown on social media. And although they mention it in onboarding trainings, like don't share your security passes, people do because they like to show off like, hey, this is my face on my security pass working for this great company. But this company has monitoring social listening in place to at least make sure that if people weren't able to attend the onboarding or maybe missed out on that crucial information, that they at least can flag it almost right away and get that post down quite quickly. So social listening type of tools can also help you to safeguard what's being said about your company online. Acting in a timely manner is also pretty important when it comes to security, intellectual property, safety. So I guess that are some of the measures that this company is taking.
That's great to hear. I mean, from my side, I've used social listening tools for marketing purposes, but I've never had to use them for security purposes or to ensure that people are staying on message and on brand. Elliot, does that kind of echo the experiences that you've had, or have you had?
Yeah, and I'm sure Maike has had similar Similar thoughts to some of the other areas that I've experienced where people become very concerned with keywords and things like that, where there's certain phrases or terms that can't be used. We see it quite a lot in the pharmaceutical businesses that we work with. So particularly when you're dealing with pharmaceuticals and drugs worldwide, there are some things that can be sold and spoken about in one country that can't be spoken about in another or have to be spoken about in a different way. And that starts to become a really interesting, from a technological standpoint on our side of things, you just start to create these very clear lines of division. If you're based in this country, this is the content that you have access to. This is the way that you can talk about it comparatively to your counterparts in, say, the US, as an example. This is the way that you're able to communicate about this content. So having that clear silos, those clear lines of division within the business is really, really helpful from a technology standpoint, because you can bucket people into those areas and give them the content that's relevant for them from that perspective. It means the same thing with those kind of content keywords. If you can use a word in one country and not in another, there's all those kind of different ways that you can do it. I mean, at the end of the day, all of this comes down to the fact that you're still dealing with employees' personal profiles. They can go and post whatever they want to onto LinkedIn at any time. It is really about how do we make this easy for them so they don't go and do that elsewhere and then get it wrong. If we can do it in a controlled way through our own process, that really is the dream for most of these kind of highly regulated businesses, I tend to find, because ideally you don't want to have to use a social listening tool and go and track all of these things down every time. You just want it to all be happening in a normal way and in a controlled manner.
Yeah, it's happening less and less because we're also giving trainings to the employees for content creation related. But part of that content creation training is also like how to deal with maybe negative engagement, but also, well, giving or getting permission from people on the picture you're sharing or whatnot. So we do it in multiple ways to make sure to cover as much as possible. Yeah, for this company, I think what also helped a lot to get the departments that were a bit scared of employee advocacy on board is to start small. So to start with a pilot consisting of people you really trust, are really natural ambassadors of the company, know very well what the brand is all about, have a bit of common sense. And to start with those people, have those regulations in place, and go from there, like showing, hey, this is working well. Let's go from there and expand it further. I guess that could also definitely help.
Definitely. I agree with the launch side of things, particularly for those businesses that are hesitant. Take a small group, prove the business case. Also find the teething issues. There might be, sometimes you uncover things where you go, actually, we didn't realize that this content type that we have, we shouldn't be posting online because it is, about a product announcement, but we haven't officially announced it. It just goes live on the blog first for whatever reason. You have all of those strange situations. So it can be really nice to do 3 months worth of testing with a small subset, as you mentioned, find out what those little niggles are before you do it with 5,000 people. And all of a sudden, the latest company kind of PR release is released 3 days early and something's gone wrong. But those sort of things, they don't happen very often. It's just nice to, if you're conscious of it, if a company's scared of these things, it's nice for them to be able to do that with a small group.
Yeah.
And from your side, Maike, I guess with the training side of things, if you're taking the starting small approach, I'd be curious to know, in your experience, has it then been, start small, go big, or is it start small and just kind of gradually increase? And then I guess it's two questions, because then how do you manage the security training? Well, depending on how you're doing it, but how are you managing that security training process, whether it's small groups or, going big and casting that wide net?
It really depends on the client and whether we've proven in the pilot that it is very successful. Because if it's successful, we do now have a client where we started with a pilot of about 40 people, and we're going to train 750 people right now across the country. So they kind of want to go big right away because it's been proved that it's working. We're slightly adjusting the training program so it's manageable for the trainers we have at Dentsu. How to do it. I think working more gradually is more ideal, I guess. But this way probably also works. And also having the different materials in place, the mandatory training is also going to help. And especially in regulated industries, I guess those things are already in place, kind of, and only have to be adjusted a little bit to also fit employee advocacy. So a combination of those.
Is there almost a renewal process or anything like that? So it's like I know it will vary depending on the organization, but like every 12 months, you need to jump back in and renew that safety and security training?
Yeah, for us at Dentsu at least it is, because also data regulations and stuff, especially in the EU, change a lot, privacy regulations. So yeah, we definitely have to do that multiple times a year sometimes.
I'm going to say, I think a big element of it as well is, and we spoke about this very briefly last time, but there's a community element to all of this as well, which is once you've got a group of people that know what they're doing and feel comfortable talking with one another, don't need to be kind of dictated to as this is how this needs to be done, but they can start kind of sharing ideas and feedback and all of these different things. That makes it so much easier to kind of manage the training exercise. A lot of our clients that have reached, real heavy degrees of scale, sort of thousands of employees signed up to their program, a lot of that has come from it becomes a normal thing within the business. This is no longer an active project as it is. This is just part and ingrained within the business. When you join the business, you get added to the advocacy program because that's what we do. And it's just really, really normalized. So everybody knows it exists. Everybody knows how it works. It takes time to get there, naturally. If you're a 100,000 person business, you can't do it overnight. And you do have to do it gradually, but the more saturated it becomes in the business, the more people that know what this thing is, how it works, why we're doing it, the less you have to do these kind of very, very formal training exercises for how this needs to work. And as Maike said, you build up assets, you build up all the questions that people do actually ask. You build up the typical is the really niche questions that come from obscure business unit in the depths of somewhere else that have a very particular mandate in the way that they do things, and they've got a question, and you learn how to go, oh, actually, does that impact this or not? And you understand these FAQs that come up. Once you have all of that, and it doesn't take that long, it can take a year, it can take 5 years for some businesses, depending on how fast they want to move. But you build all of those assets together, it becomes a cultural sort of item within the business. And from there, you scale naturally. People raise their hand when they have a question that isn't immediately available.
Yeah. Stakeholder management is also super important. Shouldn't be something like the marketing department is asking from you or the recruitment department is asking from you, but really managers are being involved, stimulating their employees within their personal development goals to work on their visibility. It should be something of the whole company, but often
Definitely.
you start with one department only.
Definitely. And it gives you the ability as well to just fire, like with those stakeholders, fire updates. You can, from that community management perspective, it might be a VP of sales that can say, hey, we got a lot more leads this month, which is great. And that's something people would interact with. But then the next month, it might be, hey, we noticed this piece of content and we'd like people to be conscious when they're sharing it because it says X, Y, and Z. So you create that community, those posts are going up, those updates are going out, people are engaged in it, as opposed to it's just something that happens in the background and people just let it run.
Yeah.
Something I'd be curious to hear, I mean, both of your takes on this, but Elliot, I think our opinions might be aligned on this topic. But Maike, in your experience, I was curious to know, because we talk a lot about how we communicate the benefits of employee advocacy to employees. And the angle that we typically take is, well, you need to communicate the benefits of personal branding. Obviously, there's so much to that because that might not mean something to everybody. So for salespeople, it's more about telling them how it's going to help them generate leads and tailoring it to the individual. But at the same time, when we're talking about security and brand safety on social media, how do you balance that empowerment of we want you to go and grow your personal brand with, but please don't say the wrong thing? Like, what have you had to do in the past, I guess, to kind of strike that perfect balance?
Yeah, it's also about creating a culture of trust, in which you can be open about making mistakes or not being sure about what to share, so people at least come to you when they're not sure instead of just post it online. I think a lot of people just have common sense. We should not forget that most people will just do whatever. And I guess companies also have to accept that indeed sometimes things will be posted that they don't like. Indeed, press releases maybe one day earlier than expected. It's the way you manage those things. So you confront the person and question like, hey, super nice you're sharing things, but this wasn't too handy. What can we learn from this to make sure it will not happen again? I think it's really about being in touch with the person that is kind of violating what you think is safe regarding your brand, and having that conversation to see how you can solve it. But I think it's only happening on a very small scale. We shouldn't forget that. And then the conversation is just very important.
That's such an important point as well. When people do make a mistake, I've had this with clients before. You'll have experienced this. You can have 5,000 people sharing really active, amazing content. One person shares something slightly wrong, and that becomes the microscope that everyone wants to look at. And it's such a shame to do that. Look at all the benefits and not just the one time that it went, not as you expected. Is such a useful thing to do. You don't want to be kind of, ringing a bell in the office if somebody's posted something wrong on social media. It's not needed, and it's going to discourage other people from being involved.
You really don't want to scare them away. It doesn't have to be too complicated, but if you have too many regulations, make it overcomplicated, then people will be scared away. And that's what you want to avoid.
Exactly. It is just, as you say, it's trust, and it's just keeping it simple. If you make it really complicated and you need to get an MBA in internal social media policy before you can share anything, nobody is going to be interested in doing it. If you go, hey, we're just trying to make this super easy, we want to make it a simple process, we've got this amazing tool called Disseminate or whatever it might be, there's lots of ways that you're going to be able to do it. That's what people want. They just want the simplest approach to it. And it makes such a big difference. And so many people as well, I think that's where they sit. They sit in a state of, if I get this wrong, I will get in trouble. Therefore, the easiest thing for me to do is just not do it, because I currently won't get in trouble for not sharing content. So there's the risk reward balance is wrong for them in the business, that they're just not incentivized in any way and not encouraged, because they think they'll get told off if they get it wrong. And it's changing that perspective for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's why recognition is also so important. So if you're doing it well, then that should also be mentioned, right? Like, good job, you're setting the example, maybe also mentioning those people as the examples of the company, so people have something to look up to.
Couldn't agree more.
We've spoken about this a number of times, but genuinely, I think from what we've seen and in my experience too, I think recognition can actually go a lot further than rewarding employees for their efforts. So somewhat off topic, but we've spoken about gamification in the past and how you can incentivize employees to start sharing more. Yes, obviously it will, spark some interest if you've got a desirable reward up for grabs. But oftentimes, especially when you're talking about the most engaged and incentivized employees, just getting that, hey, like, well done, like that recognition and that show of gratitude as well, to be like, thank you for participating, because yes, it's a two-way street, but ultimately it's, organizations start this because there's organizational benefits. The employee benefits, obviously, not an afterthought, but it kind of comes part and parcel, I guess. Okay, so as always, we just wanted to kind of jump in and summarize the, I guess, key takeaways. But because it's the first time we've had three people on this podcast, rather than just have, one person's opinion on what these key takeaways are and what our, I guess, most impactful tips would be to manage everything that we've spoken about, I thought it would be valuable if we just went through kind of one at a time and went through each of our key takeaways based on personal experiences and based on this conversation too. So, Maike, as you are the guest for today's episode, I'll let you start. What's been your key takeaway?
Well, we discussed a lot. We talked about a lot of different tools, measurement strategies, but I think out of all of that, keep it stupid simple. Make sure it's easy, accessible, it's fun, it doesn't scare people away. So yeah, keep it stupid simple.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the phrase, keep it stupid simple. I feel like people within Disseminate are going to be hearing that a lot from me over the coming weeks now. That is brilliant. But mine does kind of tie in with that, to be honest, because my key takeaway, and, we've spoken about this on the podcast before, is providing people with the policies, guidelines that they need. But specifically, I just wanted to highlight the social media policy. and just kind of tie in with what Maike you've just said. Keep your social media policy stupid simple. So firstly, make sure you've got a social media policy, make sure it's accessible, but then lastly, just make sure it's simple and digestible by anybody within the organization, and so that you don't need, you know, a law degree to understand the copy that's within the policy itself. Which means lastly, but certainly not by any means least, over to you, Elliot.
I'm going to go with, I would say trust is probably the biggest takeaway I would have with this. Trust your employees to use common sense and post content onto social media. Then nobody's posting onto social media trying to get things wrong. They're trying to post to develop the brand, their personal brand, enable them to be able to do that, trust them to do the right thing. They're not working against you, they're working with you from that perspective. And I think that is a really, really important thing to consider as well as, you know, keeping it simple for them to be able to do that.
100%.
I love it.
Yeah. Keep
it stupid simple, give people the docs and resources they need, and trust them. I think that's 3 great takeaways there. And lastly, I wanted to finish on something slightly different with this episode, because we haven't done this before. But Maike, because you've been involved in so many employee advocacy programs, Elliot too, but Maike being the guest, I wanted to ask you, because there's so many misconceptions around what it is to be a program manager, around the time needed and what the day-to-day looks like. What, in your opinion, stripped back, does the day in the life of an employee advocacy program manager look like?
I think it's mostly about stakeholder management, making sure other people are doing what you want them to do. So having a team, creating content, maybe yourself making some reports on how the employee advocacy program is living up to your expectations and the objectives you've set at the beginning, which you mentioned is one of the most important things. Encouraging it. There's so much, there can be a lot of things involved, but you can also delegate it a lot to the different teams. Also depends a bit on the stage you're in, whether you're running a pilot, starting, learning, or whether it's already like a program at scale that is already running out of its own, so to say. So a day in a life is different for every size of employee advocacy program, I guess. But it's a bit of content, it's a bit of reporting, it's a bit of stakeholder management. And most important, I guess, being in touch with the people involved in your program.
Completely agree. And I'd say something that people forget all too often, and it's the reason I wanted to ask the question, is because people often think that it's, you know, something that you can set up and then just forget about and kind of go on about your, you know, your business as usual role and hope that the results come flying in. But as you've made very clear there, it's something that needs constant management, nurture. But like you said, stakeholder management is everything. If you set it up correctly, then, you know, it should be a case of just making sure that everybody's doing what they should be doing.
Yeah.
Amazing. So very lastly, Maike, while we've got you here, I was curious to know, now that we're inviting guests onto the podcast, who would you like to see us speak with next?
I think, as I'm working at a modern media agency, so a lot of my colleagues are working not with employee posts, but with advertisements, I would recommend you to talk with the LinkedIn Marketing Solutions team. They got a quite nice new ad placement, which is called Thought Leader Ads. And with that, you can boost, so to say, employee posts. So you have the authenticity of the employee combined with the media reach of ads. So that could be a way where marketing departments could also include employee advocacy in their paid media campaigns.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I'll definitely have to check it out. I guess finally then, if you're listening to this and you, I don't know, maybe the social media policy or brand guidelines advice kind of resonated with you, we do have heaps of resources and templates on putting together social media policies, security training and that kind of thing. Anything under the sun that we can find, we will drop into the comments below or into the description wherever you're listening to this episode. But Maike, thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll catch you guys in 2 weeks' time.
Cool. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.